The night Zara Mensa walked into high-end restaurant, she had already decided she was leaving in 40 minutes. She had timed it on the taxi ride over. 40 minutes was polite. 40 minutes was enough to eat something small, answer whatever questions came her way, and exit without owing anyone an apology. She had done this before, not in Busan, but back in Atlanta, where the rules were different and the stakes were lower. A blind date was just a blind date. You showed up. You survived it. You went home. What she had not planned for was the man already sitting at the table when she arrived. She saw him before she reached the host stand. The restaurant was all glass and low amber light, the kind of place built to make people feel important just by being inside it. Every table was occupied by people leaning forward, laughing too carefully, dressed to signal something. But at the corner table by the far window, the one with the unobstructed view of Busan Harbor, a man sat completely still. He wasn't looking at the view. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking at anything, except a stack of documents spread across the white tablecloth. He held a fountain pen loosely in his right hand, and he was reading, at a dinner reservation, with a date he was supposedly expecting. Zara stopped walking for just a second. Something about that image pressed against a nerve she couldn't name. Not rudeness exactly, something colder than rudeness. The complete and total assumption that the world would wait. She kept moving, took her seat across from him, set her bag on the chair beside her, unfolded her napkin. He did not look up. For exactly 4 seconds, she watched him read. Then she picked up the menu. Fine. His name was Hyun-Soo Kwon. She'd been told that much by Mrs. Oh, the managing partner at Seojin Legal Group, who had pressed this evening on her with the cheerful insistence of someone who thought she was doing Zara a favor. A good man, Mrs. Oh had said. Established. Respectable. Someone you should know. Zara had nodded the way you nod when someone older is clearly not going to stop talking. She hadn't asked anything further. She didn't particularly want to know. Now, sitting 3 feet from him, she studied the top of his head. Dark hair. Sharp part. The kind of stillness in his shoulders that wasn't relaxed. It was controlled. Like everything in his body was being held at a precise angle on purpose. He reached for his water glass without looking up. Took one measured sip. Set it back down with exactly the right amount of sound. None. Zara's jaw shifted. She tried once. Offered her name. He said his. One word. No decoration. She asked how he knew Mrs. Oh, he said through work. She asked what kind of work. He said logistics. She asked what that meant in practice. He said it was complicated. Then he turned a page. She ordered the fish. She ate it. She watched the lights of Busan Harbor shimmer across the water below the glass wall. Dozens of tankers and tugboats and container ships sitting quiet in the dark. And she thought about her father. She always thought about her father when she ran out of other things to think about. James Mensa had come to Busan 11 years ago for a real estate deal. He was 43. He had worked his whole life in commercial property back in Atlanta, saved carefully, built something real, and then a contact told him about a development opportunity in Busan's port district that was going to be the next big thing. He'd believed it. He'd come. And then one morning she remembered this because she was 16 and she had answered the phone. Her mother had called her father in the middle of the night, and his voice on the other end had been completely flat, like someone had pressed a button and turned off everything that made him him. He came home 3 weeks later. He never mentioned Busan again. Not once. Not in 11 years. Not for Mrs. O. Not for Seojin Legal Group, or the senior translator position she was billing as a career move. She was here because at 27 years old, she had decided she was done watching her father carry something he refused to name. She was going to find it herself. Across the table, Hyun-Soo Kwon turned another page. Zara set down her fork. She dabbed her mouth. She looked at him. Really looked, and he still didn't look back. 40 minutes had come and gone without her noticing. She was now in extra time, and for reasons that irritated her, she had stayed. You fell for me already, didn't you? She thought. That's the only reason a man like you keeps not looking. If you didn't care, you'd at least glance up to confirm I was still here. She picked up her bag. She placed her napkin on the table. She stood up. Every head in the room turned. She didn't know that. She wasn't watching the room. She was already angling toward the exit, her heels quiet on the stone floor, her chin level, her back straight. Behind her she heard nothing, and then she felt it. Not a sound. Not a word. Just a weight. The specific and unmistakable sensation of someone's eyes landing on you for the first time, pressing against the back of your neck like a hand not quite touching skin. She did not turn around. If she had turned around, she would have seen something that no one else in that restaurant, no one in the whole of Busan, had seen before. Kang Hyun-Soo Kwon was smiling. Not broadly, not warmly, Just the corners of his mouth, just barely, in a way that changed the entire geography of his face. She didn't turn around. That was the first thing that would haunt him. The package arrived at Seojin Legal Group the following morning at 8:47 a.m. It was addressed to Zara Mensah, 14th Floor Translation Division. No return name on the sender line. Inside the padded envelope was a document folder and a handwritten note. One line on cardstock. Thank you for your time last night. Here is your next assignment. H. Kwan. Zara read it twice standing at her desk with her coat still on. Then she laughed, a short, involuntary sound that made her colleague Jin-ah look up from across the room. Something funny? No, Zara said, and put the note face down on the desk. Thank you for your time. She was the one who had walked out of the dinner. She had left him sitting there, alone, with his documents and his practiced stillness, and he was thanking her for her time. Like she'd done something gracious. Like leaving early was a gift. She sat down, she opened the folder. Her fingers went still on the third page, stamped across the top in bold. KW Holdings, Legal Division, Confidential. KW Holdings was the opposing party in a commercial arbitration case she'd been assigned 3 months ago. She had been translating depositions for Seojin's client, a small port logistics company claiming breach of contract. The other side, the side that had allegedly voided a building lease without notice, leaving the logistics company with nowhere to operate, was KW Holdings. Hyun-Soo Kwan's company. She sat very still for a moment. The office hummed around her. Jin-ah typed something. The printer ran a cycle. Outside the window, Busan's harbor sat gray and flat under low morning cloud. This is not a coincidence, Zara thought. She was sure of it, in the way you're sure of things that haven't yet shown their shape. She picked up her pen and started reading. He came to the office that afternoon himself. Zara heard the shift before she saw it, a ripple in the usual rhythm of the floor, the kind that happens when someone walks through a space who doesn't normally walk through it. Chairs scraped subtly. Someone stood up from the desk by the door. Jin-ah made a small sound. Zara did not look up from her document. She heard him stop in front of her desk. She felt the pause. She kept her eyes down. I've never had a client come up to my desk before, she said. A beat. Then neither have I. His voice was lower than she'd expected. Not aggressive low. Careful low. Like each word was chosen before it left his mouth. She looked up. Up close, Hyun-Soo Kwan was harder to place than she'd expected. His face was composed. Not blank, composed. The difference being that blank is nothing, and composed is everything being held just behind the surface. His eyes were fixed on her, with an attention that made the air between them feel shorter than the distance actually was. If questions come up during the translation, he said, contact me directly. No intermediary. He held out a business card. She didn't take it. Clients don't give me their direct line, she said. You want to tell me why? The documents are sensitive. I know that. That's why I'm asking. He didn't answer. He set the card on the edge of her desk and turned to leave. 2 steps and then he stopped. His back was still to her when he spoke. Zara's look back last night. Why? He asked. She let a moment pass. Then she said, because there was no reason to. It was a lie. She was the only one in the room who knew that. He left without another word. Zara looked at the business card on her desk for a long time before she picked it up. He messaged once a day, every day, for 3 days. Translation questions. Precise, minimal, necessary. She answered the same way. It felt like 2 people speaking a language they'd both agreed to keep formal. On the 4th day, the message read, Have you eaten dinner? Zara stared at it for 10 seconds without moving. She typed back, anything that's not a translation question gets billed separately. His reply came in under a minute. Go ahead and bill me. She laughed, caught herself immediately, pressed her lips together, looked out the window at the harbor, where a cargo ship was making its slow, enormous way out toward open water. This was the 2nd time this man had made her laugh without meaning to. A week after the dinner, Zara was working a late evening at a cafe near the harbor, a small place she'd found her 2nd week in Busan, with window seats and strong coffee and Wi-Fi that didn't cut out. She had her laptop open, 3 tabs running, and her headphones around her neck. She looked up to order a refill and found Hyun-Soo Kwan sitting in the window seat directly across from her. No greeting, no explanation. He had a cup of black coffee and a slim folder of documents, and he looked completely like someone who had simply ended up here by the ordinary progression of his evening. Zara looked at him for a moment. He looked at his documents. She looked back at her laptop. An hour passed. Then 2. The cafe thinned out until there were 3 other people, and then 2. Around midnight, Zara closed her laptop. She packed up her bag and walked past his table toward the door. She paused. I'm the only one who can see your pulse, she said. Hyun-Soo's coffee cup tilted. just slightly, just the smallest degree on the saucer, and then stilled. The hand that had barely moved at all in the restaurant. The hand that had held that fountain pen at exactly the same angle for an hour. It held its breath for a full second. I know, Zara said quietly. Mine is too. She walked out into the cold harbor air. Behind her, a few seconds later, she heard the soft scrape of a chair. 3 nights after the cafe, Zara was taking the late stairs down toward the Nampo subway platform when she noticed the 2 men. They hadn't announced themselves. They hadn't said a word. They had simply appeared, one on her left, one slightly behind her right shoulder, and matched her pace exactly. The way people do when the point isn't to chase you, it's to make sure you know they could. Her heartbeat spiked. She kept walking. Don't run. Don't change your pace. Get to the turnstiles. Get somewhere visible. She reached the bottom of the stairs. Standing directly in front of the turnstiles was a man she recognized. Taemin, the aide who had twice now been present in the periphery of her interactions with Hyun-soo. He was looking at the 2 men behind her. He didn't say a word to them. He didn't have to. They dissolved, back up the stairs, gone, like they had never been there at all. Zara exhaled slowly. The car is waiting, Miss Mensa, Taemin said. She looked at him for a long moment. Hyun-soo Kwon sent you. The car is waiting. He was in the back seat, not up front, not across from her, right there in the seat she had to get into. He was looking out the window when she opened the door. The city pressed against the glass outside, all neon and scaffolding and harbor light. She got in. The car moved. Neither of them spoke for almost a full minute. You going to explain that? Zara said. Explain what? Those 2 men. And why your aide happened to be standing exactly where they stopped. He didn't move his gaze from the window. The documents are at a sensitive phase. I take translator security seriously. That's not the firm's protocol. No, so it's yours. He said nothing. She looked at the side of his face, the line of his jaw, the way it was set just slightly harder than usual. Then she noticed it. The tips of his ears, catching the passing streetlights. Just the faintest color, barely there. She looked away before he could catch her looking. Outside, Busan's harbor slid past the glass, enormous and dark and full of ships going somewhere they hadn't arrived yet. The document that changed everything was in the 5th stack. Zara had been working late on the 32nd floor of Seojin Legal Group for 3 hours by the time she reached it. The office had emptied out by 7. By 9, even the security desk on her floor had rotated shifts, and the new guard hadn't yet figured out that the light in the translation division never went off when Zara was on deadline. She had her shoes off, her second coffee going cold on the desk corner, and 4 stacks of translated materials already flagged and sealed beside her. The 5th stack was the oldest. The documents at the bottom were on slightly heavier paper, the kind that aged differently than modern print. She flipped through the first 2 pages. Standard commercial language. Port District property. Building lease acquisition. Assignment of third-party investment rights. She turned to page 3, her hand stopped. A date. 7 years ago, almost to the month. And underneath it, 2 names. One was a broker whose name she didn't recognize. The other was James Mensa. The room went very quiet. She turned the page, then the next. Her eyes moved faster now, scanning, and with each line the cold crept higher. Up her fingers, into her wrists, settling somewhere beneath her sternum. Seoul commercial building investment. Except it wasn't Seoul, it was Busan. Forced contract termination. Third-party investor assets, frozen pending arbitration. Overseas investment accounts placed under review. And then at the bottom of the final page, in the box reserved for senior authorization, a stamp, an approval, KW Holdings, senior executive authorization, Kwon Hyun-soo. Zara did not move for a long time. The fluorescent light above her head had been flickering for 4 days. She had submitted the maintenance request twice. Right now it buzzed and dimmed and buzzed again, and she sat in its bad light, staring at her father's name on a document that should not have existed in any file she was ever meant to touch. 7 years ago, James Mensa had come to Busan. She knew the bare outline the way you know the shape of something you were never allowed to look at. Directly. He came for a property investment. He believed in it. He lost everything overnight. He flew home. He never spoke of it again. She had spent 6 months in this city, trying to find the edge of that silence. And here it was, sitting in a legal folder on a desk she had been assigned to. Inside a case, she had been brought on to 3 months before she ever heard the name Hyun-soo Kwon. She picked up her phone, found his number. She had never called it, only ever texted. Only ever in the disciplined shorthand of professional correspondence. It rang twice. Miss Mensa. His voice came through immediately. No grogginess, no delay. She had the irrational thought that this man probably never slept the way normal people slept. It's late. Is everything I need to see you. Her own voice surprised her. It was flat in a way she hadn't planned. Right now. A silence. Not long. Where are you? The office. 32nd floor. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He made it in 12. She was standing on the front steps of the building when his car pulled up. She hadn't been able to stay inside. The office had started to feel like a room that was pressing in from all sides, and she needed air even if the air outside was cold, and smelled like diesel and low tide from the harbor. She had the documents in her hand, not tucked away, not folded into a folder, just held, in her fist, pages slightly crushed where her grip had tightened without her realizing. Hansu stepped out of the car. He looked at her face, and he stopped walking. She had seen this man compose himself through everything. She had watched him sit unmoved through a dinner where any other person would have made an effort. She had watched him turn away from his own right-hand man mid-conversation. She had watched him sit in a car while Busan slid past the glass and give nothing away. But right now, 2 steps out of his vehicle, something in his expression shifted in a way she didn't have a name for yet. He started walking again. She held the documents out before he reached her. James Mensa, she said, he's my father. The wind came off the harbor. It moved between them and kept going. Hyun-soo did not reach for the papers. His eyes dropped to them briefly, just briefly, and then came back to her face. And in that 1 second, in the way his gaze didn't waver or deflect or perform anything at all, she understood something that made her chest cave in slightly. He already knew. Did you know who I was, she said, and her voice was very controlled, from the blind date, from the moment you sent the assignment to this firm, or from the first time you heard my name. He said nothing. Answer me. Zara, that's not an answer. He held her gaze. He didn't step back. He didn't offer her something easy. Yes, he said. I knew. The word landed. She felt it the way you feel something that breaks a structure you'd been leaning on without realizing. She exhaled once, sharp and short. Do you have any idea, she said quietly, what happened to my father after he came home from Busan? What 7 years looks like on a man who lost everything and never told his family why? He didn't eat right for 2 years. He didn't sleep. He stopped making plans. He just stopped. Like someone had pulled the cord on whatever powered him. Her voice was doing something at the edges that she was fighting very hard to control. Was that because of you? Is your name on that page because of you? Hyun-soo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I didn't ruin your father. I was trying to protect him. Zara stopped breathing. What? Come inside. This is going to take time to explain properly. The lobby of Seo-jin Legal Group at 12:30 in the morning was a different country from the lobby at business hours. The front desk was empty. The fountain near the entrance had been switched off. The whole space was marble and low lighting and the specific kind of silence that only exists in buildings designed to hold thousands of people when those people are gone. They sat across from each other on the lobby seating. A long, low couch, the kind meant to make clients feel at ease. Neither of them looked at ease. Hyun-soo spoke. For the first time, in Zara's experience of him, he spoke without being prompted, without minimal, without economy. He started at the beginning. 7 years ago, a broker named Song Dae-won had been operating inside the lower tier of PKW Holdings investment network. Song had built a pattern. He identified legitimate overseas investors, used their credibility to attract larger capital pools, then structured the contracts in a way that the primary investor was exposed, and the larger money was insulated. James Mensa had been brought in as the face of a Busan Port District property deal. He was real. His credentials were real. His money was real. Song had used all of that to pull in 3 times the investment from silent backers, with James's name on the visible paperwork. When the deal collapsed, when Song triggered the contract void, James took the visible hit. Frozen assets, terminated agreements, his name on every document. The silent money walked away clean. Zara listened without moving. You could have stopped the broker, she said when he paused. Song was connected to a senior partner who had been at KW Holdings longer than I had been running it. I didn't have the leverage to touch him without a 2-year paper trail, minimum. There was no time. The contract void was happening in 72 hours. So you pushed my father out instead. Getting him out before the void meant his exposure was limited. He lost the deal. He didn't lose everything. A pause. What he was told about why. That was Song's version. I couldn't correct it without exposing an investigation that wasn't finished. Zara looked at him for a long time. She studied his face the way she studied documents, looking for the place where the language didn't match the structure underneath. She had learned to do this in 6 years of legal translation. You could feel when a text was covering something. You could feel when the words were honest but the construction was wrong. She couldn't find it. His face was composed, as always. but the composure wasn't hiding anything. It was just the only way he knew how to be. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that you got my father out of a deal that would have destroyed him completely. And then you couldn't tell him why. And you just left him thinking he'd been betrayed by a city he trusted." Hein-Su held her gaze. Then, for the first time since she had met him, he looked down, not away, down, just briefly, just for a second, like something in him acknowledged a weight it hadn't moved around in a long time. That was the most honest answer she had ever seen from him, and it was wordless. 7 years, she said. Not one word. He didn't respond. The fluorescent light above the lobby's secondary corridor buzzed once. The entrance doors exhaled cold air from outside. Zara pressed her hands flat against her knees and looked at the marble floor and tried to sort through the shape of what she was feeling, which was not one thing but many things at once, layered and pressing against each other, in a way that made it impossible to identify any single one. Clearly, she was angry. She was sure of that. But the anger had a strange quality. It wasn't clean the way she'd expected it to be. It wasn't the anger of finding out she'd been used. It was something more complicated. The anger of finding out the story she'd built in her head for 6 months was wrong in a way that didn't resolve anything, because her father had still lost 11 years of himself, and a man had known why and said nothing. And that man was sitting across from her right now with the city's worst reputation, and apparently an anonymous paper trail that told a completely different story. "I don't know what to do with this," she said finally. "You don't have to do anything with it tonight." She looked up. He was watching her. That same attention. The kind that felt like it cost him something he didn't normally spend. "I need to go home," she said. He stood when she did. He walked her to the lobby entrance and stopped at the door. Taemin was already outside, the car idling. He had not been called. He was simply there, the way he was always simply there. She paused at the door. She turned back. "The blind date," she said. "You volunteered for that." It wasn't a question. He didn't confirm or deny it. He just looked at her in the way he'd looked at her across the table that first night. Like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find, and had no adequate protocol for what to do with it. She left. 2 days of silence. Zara went to work. She translated. She answered emails. She declined Jinnah's invitation to lunch twice and accepted it on the third ask because Jinnah had the specific persistence of someone raised in a family that considered refusal a first draft. She ate bibimbap and nodded at things and thought about almost nothing that she was asked to think about. A professional notice arrived from KW Holdings. The translation assignment was temporarily suspended pending internal review. Short, clean, no personal message. Zara read it, put her phone face down, and stared at the harbor out the window for several minutes. She told herself this was clean. This was the appropriate outcome. 2 people who had collided at the wrong angle had now been given the natural buffer of professional distance, and that was good, and she was going to use it. On the third evening, her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't pick up. She nearly let it go to voicemail, went back to the translation she was barely reading, and forgot about it. She picked up. "Is this Zara Mensah?" The voice was older, male. Speaking Korean with the cadence of someone who had grown up in a region she couldn't immediately place, not Busan's accent, something further north and softer at the edges. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Kwon Byung-chul. I'm Hyun-Su's father." Zara sat very still. "I understand," the old man said, "that the 2 of you spoke a few nights ago about James Walker." "James Mensah," she corrected automatically. A soft sound on the other end, something almost like a smile. "Yes. James Mensah, I apologize. I've been thinking of him by the wrong name for 7 years. A pause. "I wonder if I could ask you to meet me for tea tomorrow morning. There are some things my son has not told you, and I believe you deserve to hear them." Zara's hand tightened on the phone. "Why you?" she asked. "Why not him?" "Because," Kwon Byung-chul said, with the patience of someone who had spent decades watching the same pattern in the same person, "that boy has never once in his life learned how to explain himself. He does everything. He says nothing. He has been this way since he was small." Another pause. "He would not call you himself, so I am calling." Outside, Busan's harbor was settling into night, the container ships going still in the dark, the port lights burning orange and cold over the water. "Okay," Zara said. The tea house was on the hillside above Gamshan. Zara had never been to this part of Busan before. The old village district where the houses were, painted in colors that had no business existing on a hillside in winter, stacked against each other in the kind of organized chaos that looked accidental from a distance and deliberate up close. She took a taxi as far as the road allowed, then walked the rest of the way up narrow stone steps flanked by ceramic pots and hand-painted tiles. The harbor enormous and flat below her, the cold morning air carrying salt and something faintly like wood smoke. The tea house was set back from the main lane. Traditional construction, low roof, wooden beams, paper screen doors that diffused the morning light into something softer than the day outside. A small sign by the entrance, no English translation. Inside, Kwon Byung-chul was already seated. He was in his mid-70s. His back carried the curve of a man who had spent decades bent over things that mattered. Documents, perhaps, or people who needed listening to. His hair was white and very neat. His hands, wrapped around a ceramic cup of pale tea, were the hands of someone who had held a lot of things over a long life and set most of them down carefully. But his eyes were Hyun-soo's eyes. That same quality of attention. The same sense of a person who was seeing more than they were acknowledging. He poured her tea before she had finished sitting down. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for calling," she said. She meant it. He nodded once, the way older Korean men sometimes did when they received something graciously. Not dismissing it, just absorbing it quietly. Outside, wind moved through the eaves. A small wind chime at the corner of the roofline rang out, one clear note, then stilled. "Hyun-soo has not mentioned you to me," the old man began. "He does not discuss personal matters, he never has." A small pause. "But he has mentioned your father. Over the years. Not often. In the way someone mentions a thing they are still carrying." Zara set her cup down. "He told me his version," she said. "About what happened 7 years ago, the broker. Getting my father out before the contract void. That part is true." Byung-chul's eyes didn't leave her face, but there is a part after that which I doubt he shared. The wind chime moved again, softer this time. "After your father returned to America," Byung-chul said, "Hyun-soo spent 2 years building a case against Song Dae-won, the broker. He did it carefully, thoroughly, in a way that could not be undone or appealed. Song lost everything, his position, his network, his licenses. He is no longer in this industry. In any industry," he paused. "That part my son will not tell you, because he does not believe it requires telling. He considers it a consequence, not a credit." Zara was very still. "The assets," she said slowly. "My father's frozen investment accounts." Byung-chul looked at her with the patience of someone waiting for a door to open on its own rather than pushing it. "They were restored," she said. "It wasn't a question by the end, anonymously, over 18 months. Transferred through a legal holding structure that left no traceable name at the originating end." The old man turned his cup once in his hands. "Your father received everything he lost. He likely assumed it was a settlement or a correction in the arbitration process, or simply a delayed legal outcome. A beat. He was never meant to know where it came from." Zara pressed her hands flat against her thighs, under the table where the old man couldn't see them. She needed something to press against. "How much?" she said. Byung-chul named a number. She exhaled. It was not a small number. It was not the kind of number a person parts with as a business correction or a liability management decision. It was the kind of number that required a choice. A personal, deliberate, costly choice. "He used his own money," she said. "His own." "Yes. And my father doesn't know." "Your father does not know. And Hyun-soo would not want him to." The old man's voice was gentle but absolutely certain. "You must understand something about my son. He was not raised to perform generosity. He was raised to solve problems. In his mind, what he did for your father was a solution to a problem he had caused indirectly. The credit is not the point. The point is that it was done." Outside, a child somewhere on the hillside was calling out. A high, bright sound that carried through the cold air and then faded. Zara stared at the table. The wood was old and smooth, worn down by years of cups and hands and conversations that had mattered. "The blind date," she said quietly. Byung-chul's expression shifted. Not into a smile exactly, but into the shape of someone who had been expecting this question and had decided in advance to be honest about it. "He volunteered," the old man said simply. Zara looked up. "When he found out that James Mensah's daughter had come to Busan, that she was working at Seo-jin, that she was 6 months into a city she didn't know, apparently looking for something she couldn't name, he asked Mrs. O to arrange it." Byung-chul paused. "I don't know what he intended when he sat down at that table. I'm not certain he knew either. But he went. He sat there for 50 minutes and barely looked at me." The old man made a soft sound, something fond and exasperated in equal measure. The sound of someone who has watched the same person make the same mistake in the same way for 30 years. "My son does not know how to be seen. He knows how to see. He has been watching people his entire life, and he is extraordinarily good at it. But the moment someone looks back, really looks, he has no idea what to do with that." He shook his head slightly. "He is not a cold man. He is a man who taught himself to run cold because it was useful." There is a difference. Zara thought about the restaurant. The fountain pen going still, the ears going red in the car, the coffee cup tilting on the saucer, all the tiny things. She thought about the way he had stood in the lobby of Seo Jin at midnight and looked down. Just once. Just briefly. When she asked him if he understood what her father's silence had cost their family. Not because he was ashamed of what he'd done. Because he was carrying something about it that he had never once put into language. And language was the only currency she was offering him, and he didn't know how to make the exchange. He does everything, his father had said, He says nothing. He's not someone who can't speak, Zara said slowly, as much to herself as to the old man across the table. He's someone who's been doing everything instead of speaking. Byung-chul looked at her with something that she could only describe as recognition. Yes, he said. Exactly that. The wind chime rang again. The harbor below the village glittered in the thin winter light. Zara wrapped both hands around her teacup and felt the warmth of it move up into her palms. She stayed another 40 minutes. They spoke about other things, about Busan, about the neighborhood, about what it was like to come to a foreign city, looking for a truth that kept rearranging itself. The old man was easy to talk to in the way that some people simply are, as if they have processed enough of their own life to sit comfortably inside someone else's for a while. When she left, she walked back down the stone steps without a clear plan for what came next. The harbor stretched out below her, enormous and patient, and Busan's harbor had started to feel, these last few weeks, like something that watched her back. She reached the bottom of the hillside steps and took out her phone. She stood there for a moment. The cold pressed in around her. A delivery scooter went past. Somewhere nearby, a Pojang matcha cart was open early, the smell of fish cake broth cutting through the salt air. She pulled up Hyunsu's number. She had scrolled past it a dozen times in the last 2 days. She had typed half a message 3 different times and deleted it. She had told herself, with complete conviction and no conviction at all, that distance was the appropriate response. She called. It rang once, twice. Miss Mensa. No surprise in his voice. But something that wasn't quite his usual composure either. A fractional difference in the quality of the silence around the word. Where are you right now? She said, a pause. Why? Because I'm coming to you. Tell me where you are. A longer pause. The kind that had weight in it, that was making a decision rather than just a delay. The office, he said. KW Holdings, 35th floor. She started walking before she ended the call. KW Holdings occupied a tower near the Newport Development District. Glass and steel, 40 stories, the kind of building that existed to make a statement about what lived inside it. Zara had passed it twice in her months in Busan without thinking much about it. Now she stood at the entrance and looked up at it for exactly 3 seconds, then went through the door. The lobby was a different experience from Seojin. Quieter, somehow, despite being larger. The proportions were different, higher ceiling, less furniture. The kind of design that communicated authority not through decoration, but through restraint. 2 security personnel were at the front desk. They looked up when she came in. Zara Mensa, she said. I'm here to see Kwon Hyun-soo. A call was made. A short exchange she couldn't fully follow. Then one of them nodded and led her to the elevator. 35th floor. The elevator opened onto a corridor that was almost entirely glass on one side, floor to ceiling facing the harbor. Busan spread out in every direction below. She could see the container ships. She could see the Gamcheon hillside. She could see, if she looked carefully, the approximate location of the tea house. Taemin was waiting at the end of the corridor. He moved toward her. Then he stopped, glanced past her and stepped to the side. She looked past him. Hyun-soo was standing at the entrance to his office, 30 feet away. He had a document in one hand. He wasn't reading it anymore. He was looking at her. She walked toward him. He didn't move to meet her. He waited, not in the way of someone calculating, but in the way of someone who had decided, without entirely meaning to let whatever was coming come rather than redirect it. She stopped 2 steps from him. The air between them had the specific quality it always had, the kind that made the actual distance feel negotiable. I met your father, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Barely. Just once. He set the document down on the table beside the door. 7 years, she said. You covered it all, anonymously. Why? A silence. It was what needed to be done. That's it? He said nothing. She took 1 step closer. What about the blind date? Volunteering for it. Was that also just what needed to be done? His jaw tightened. She watched it happen. The thing he did, the mechanism that kept everything internal. And then she watched something else happen. Something she had not seen before. Not a crack exactly. More like a door swinging inward on its own, slowly. Because the thing that had been holding it closed had finally decided to stop. He opened his mouth. No, he said. The word was different from other words he had said to her. She couldn't explain why. It was one syllable, and it landed differently than any of the sentences he had constructed so carefully over the past weeks. Then what was it? He looked at her. The attention she'd grown used to, the kind that cost something, was there. But changed now. Not managed. Just present. I wanted to see what kind of person James Mensa's daughter turned out to be, he said. That was the reason I sat down. She didn't move. And then, he said, more slowly, the moment you pushed back from that table and stood up, that reason changed. The 35th floor of KW Holdings was very quiet. Somewhere below, the port went on. Containers moving, cranes pivoting, enormous ships negotiating the harbor mouth. The whole city continuing at its own enormous pace, indifferent to the 35 floors of silence above it. Zara's eyes were doing something she was not entirely in control of. Not tears. Something earlier than tears. The thing that happens in your chest before the rest of you catches up. You should have told me, she said. Her voice was steady but only just. I know. My father spent 7 years not knowing why he lost everything. 7 years Hanyunsu, I know. And he said it the way someone says something they have been saying to themselves for a long time in a room with no one listening. She looked at him. This man who had built a city's worth of fear around himself like architecture, who sent his aid to subway stairwells and covered losses that weren't his, and volunteered for blind dates in harbor restaurants because the daughter of a man he'd spent 7 years thinking about had come to Busan looking for something, and she felt the last of the anger do something unexpected. It didn't disappear, but it shifted shape. It became something that had room for other things inside it. His hand moved, slowly, toward her face. And then it stopped, just short, asking. She nodded. His hand touched her cheek. The palm that Seoul rumored could end a deal with a single phone call that Busan said ran cold in every room it entered. In this one moment, against her cheekbone, it was warm, just warm. Nothing else, Kwon-soo, she said quietly. You can't keep running from this. I'm not running, he said, not anymore. Outside, a cargo ship moved slowly out of Busan harbor toward open water, unhurried, enormous, carrying what it carried toward wherever it was going. The harbor lights caught the wake it left behind and turned it briefly gold. Please, if you have gotten this far, comment where you're watching this from and subscribe to support the channel. 3 days after the 35th floor, Zara called her father. She had been thinking about how to do it since she walked out of KW Holdings into the cold harbor air and stood on the pavement for a long time, watching a garbage truck make its slow, indifferent way down the port road. She had run through versions of the conversation in her head, the way she ran through difficult translations, looking for the place where the meaning lived, the place where the words were honest without being more than the moment could hold. She called on a Tuesday evening Busan time. Tuesday morning in Atlanta. She knew he would be up. He was always up early. That was another thing Busan had taken from him, whatever ability he'd once had to sleep past 6. It rang 4 times, then his voice, Zara girl. Just that. Just her name and the word he'd added to it since she was small. The 2-word construction that meant I see you and I'm glad, and nothing bad has happened yet. All of it compressed into a greeting. She had planned an opening. She forgot it immediately. Dad, she said, I found something in Busan about what happened 7 years ago. A silence on the other end. Not the silence of someone surprised. The silence of someone who had been waiting, with extraordinary patience, for a door to open that they had never been able to open themselves. Okay, he said. His voice was careful. Even, tell me. So she told him. Not everything, not yet, not in one phone call. But the shape of it, the broker, the scam, the man who had gotten him out before the collapse hit its worst point. The 2 years of anonymous work that came after. The restored accounts that had arrived, she now understood. Not from any legal settlement, but from a single deliberate choice made by a person who had decided that a wrong done on his watch was a wrong he would correct, regardless of whether anyone ever knew. Her father was quiet for a long time after she finished. The money that came back, he said slowly. I assumed it was the arbitration, a delayed payout. It wasn't. Another long silence. James Walker, he said softly. And she realized he was talking to himself, using his own name the way people do when they're placing themselves back inside a memory. I was so sure I'd just been foolish. That I'd missed something obvious and paid for it. That the city had eaten me alive because I hadn't been careful enough. You weren't foolish, she said. You were set up by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And someone else pulled you out before it got worse, and spent 2 years making sure you didn't lose what you were supposed to lose. She heard him breathe. Who? He said. She told him the name. The silence that followed was the longest yet. She waded through it. Outside her apartment window, the harbor sat dark and full of lights, the ships, the cranes, the distant orange glow of the port terminals. All of it moving at its slow, enormous pace. He never said anything, her father said finally. No, why? Zara thought about a tea house on a hillside. A wind chime. An old man with white hair wrapping both hands around a cup and saying, "That boy has never once in his life learned how to explain himself. He does everything. He says nothing." Because explaining wasn't the point, she said. Fixing it was. Her father made a sound she couldn't fully categorize, somewhere between a laugh and something older and heavier than a laugh. The sound of a man setting down something he has been carrying for so long that the act of setting it down is almost disorienting. 11 years, he said. I came home and I put it in a box. I didn't want your mother to know how badly I'd failed. I didn't want you kids to see that. We saw it anyway, Dad. We just didn't know what we were seeing. I know. A quiet X. I know you did. She pressed her back against the wall beside her window and looked up at the ceiling of her apartment and let a few seconds of silence do the work. That words couldn't said. Are you okay? She started, then stopped, then tried again. I think I'm going to be more okay than I've been in a while. Give me a few days with this. Take whatever you need. Zara girl. Yeah. Be careful over there. That city. That city has teeth. I know, she said, but it also has something else. She heard him smile. She couldn't see it, but she knew the exact shape of it. The way it moved slowly, the way it reached his eyes last. Okay, he said. Okay. She saw Yun-Soo 4 days later. Not by arrangement, not through Taemin, not in the context of documents or assignments or professional correspondence, with billings that were half joke and half test. He appeared at the cafe by the harbor. Her cafe, the window seat place. On a Thursday evening when she had not told him she would be there. He walked in. He ordered black coffee. He sat in the window seat across from her. She looked up from her laptop. He looked back. Neither of them performed surprise. You're doing that thing again, she said. What thing? Where you end up somewhere I am and act like you were just in the area. He picked up his coffee cup. The Harbor District has several establishments. There are 43 cafes within walking distance of this building, she said. I counted. In the first 2 weeks. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. You counted the cafes. I like to know my options. And yet you come here every time. She looked at him across the table. The harbor light was coming through the window behind him, turning everything at the edges of the room slightly gold. He looked, she thought, almost exactly the same as the first night she'd seen him. The same stillness, the same composure, except that now she knew what lived underneath it, and that knowledge changed the entire picture the way a translator's note changes a text. Nothing in the words had moved, but the meaning was different. I called my father, she said. He went still. I told him what happened, most of it. She paused. He didn't know the money came from you. Hyun-Soo set his cup down. He looked at the table for a moment, and she recognized the gesture now. Not avoidance. Just the habit of a man who needed a half-second more than most to decide what was honest and what was performance, and refused to offer anything that wasn't the former. How is he said. The question was so quiet, so stripped of anything but what it was actually asking, that it took her a moment to absorb it. He's going to be okay, she said. He said, give him a few days with it. Hyun-Soo nodded once. He didn't say anything else. He didn't offer relief or satisfaction, or the expression of someone who had been waiting for validation. He just absorbed it, the way he absorbed most things, completely privately, with no visible surface for it to reflect off of. She watched him. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. The night of the blind date, when I stood up. She paused. What did you think? He looked at her, a long moment. I thought, he said slowly, that I had spent 20 years in rooms full of people who knew exactly who I was and behaved accordingly, and that you were the first person I had ever sat across from who had no idea and behaved accordingly. A pause. It was disorienting. Disorienting. In a way I didn't have a word for. She thought about this. And the smile. His expression shifted. Just slightly. What smile? The one you had when I walked out. Someone in that restaurant saw it. No one in that restaurant saw anything. Hyun-Soo. A beat. The corner of his mouth moved. That same almost movement she had seen once before. The one that changed the whole geography. I wasn't aware I was smiling. That makes it worse, she said. That means it was real. He looked at her. Something in his eyes that she was still learning the name for. Not warm exactly, not soft, but open in a way that his face was not designed for and was attempting anyway, with the specific imperfect effort of someone doing something for the first time. Yes, he said, it was real. Outside, a fishing boat was making its way back into the harbor. Its lights small and warm against the dark water. The cafe was mostly empty. A couple in the far corner, someone reading alone near the door. The world was continuing at its regular pace, uninterested in the fact that something in this window seat had changed into a shape it had not been before. Zara reached across the table. Not for his hand exactly, just close to it. Her fingers an inch from his on the tabletop, asking the same way he had asked in his office. He turned his hand over, slowly, his palm facing up. She set her hand in his. The harbor went on outside, the lights went on, the ships went on. And two people sat in a window seat in Busan with their hands touching, and said nothing for a long time, which was, for both of them, its own kind of language. This is what nobody tells you about the people who run coldest. They are not cold because they feel nothing. They are cold because they felt too much, too early, in a world that did not reward the showing of it. They learned to translate feeling into action the way Zara learned to translate language. Finding the equivalent, the closest match, the thing that carries the meaning across without losing it in transit. It is imperfect. It is sometimes invisible to the person on the receiving end, but it is never absent. Hyun-soo spent 7 years making sure a man he had never met recovered from something that happened on his watch. He did it without acknowledgement, without record, without a single word to the person it was meant for. That is not the behavior of a man who does not feel. That is the behavior of a man who has decided that feeling, if it cannot be made useful, has no business being spoken aloud. And Zara Mensah crossed an ocean looking for a truth that no one had handed her, and no one had promised her, no one had guaranteed she would find. She walked into a blind date she didn't want, walked out of it on principle, walked into a confrontation on a staircase in the middle of the night, walked into a lobby at midnight with a folder of documents that broke, something open in her, walked into a tea house on a hillside, walked into a tower on the harbor, and walked back out changed. Not because the city gave her what she came looking for, but because what she found was larger than what she came looking for, and she was brave enough not to put it back down. Here is what this story is really about. It is about the distance between what we do and what we say. Most of us live our whole lives inside that gap, doing things we never explain, carrying things we never name, hoping that someone patient enough will one day stand close enough to read what we never wrote down. Hyun-soo's entire life had been a text without a translator until Zara. And Zara had spent 6 months in a foreign city, treating every document like it might contain the thing she was looking for. Until she found it not in a document, but in a man who had spent 7 years making sure her father's loss was restored, one anonymous transfer at a time, without ever once asking to be seen for it. The deepest feelings almost always live in the hardest-looking places. Watch for the paused pen, the reddened ear, the coffee cup that tilts slightly and then rights itself, the chair that scrapes back from a table in an empty cafe just after midnight. Someone's whole heart might be living inside the smallest moment. Quiet as a wind chime on a Busan hillside, easy to miss if you are moving too fast. Don't move too fast. This story is a work of fiction. All characters, places, and events depicted are entirely imaginary and created for narrative purposes only.